But I especially want to say to Jessica, who's here in the blonde hair, she just got her doctorate on Tuesday. Pat and Jessica, we are really in need of some good news. The world out there is so miserable. I've been coming to these meetings for 20 years. I started coming to these meetings when OJ was in the news, and now it's like the same news over again. And everybody's just so shocked that an athlete might do what he did. Rice, I'm talking about. But anyway, between that and the international news, it's just all bad. And Jessica and Pat have just the most positive program and the most rewarding work that they're doing. So please join me in welcoming Jessica and Pat.
So I'm going to see if I can do this without having to hold this, perhaps. So thank you guys all for coming today. I'm really, really excited to be here. We were invited, as she mentioned, and we actually took a little look at the website, and we're in pretty good company. You guys have some pretty amazing speakers come to these meetings, so we're really honored to be here, and we really appreciate the opportunity. So, as she mentioned, my name is Jessica Thomas, which I guess is now Dr. Thomas. It's kind of weird to hear. And I'm joined by Pat. And during my endeavor in graduate school, I opted to study the Canine Connection program for my dissertation. And so today I'm going to be sharing some of the very overwhelmingly positive results of my dissertation and my continued work with Pat in the program. So today, we're going to discuss really the crux of what's presented here in this quote. And if you take only one thing with you today, let it be this: that within the milieu of the human-animal attachment bond, there appears to be an opportunity for both social and emotional development, particularly for youth at greatest risk of poorer life outcomes. And that development, which has been noted qualitatively, has now been found to be measurably beneficial for these kids. So overall, my goal for today is to really kind of plant seeds in each of you to combat this view of human-animal interaction as novelty, where by the end of our time this morning, I hope that each of you are able to really begin to see animals as potential kind of furry agents of change, particularly for at-risk youth, and perhaps even leave here with some new ideas for working with your own clients. So to start off, I'd like to introduce some definitions of terms that are going to be used throughout the presentation, just to make sure that we're kind of speaking the same language as we move through the talk this morning. Then I'm going to discuss, since we're here to really kind of discuss interaction, I want to kind of really briefly set the stage for how human-animal interaction can work with at-risk youth, using both attachment and cognitive models. So then I'm going to jump in to kind of briefly explore why relationships with animals hold really so much promise for working with these kids. Then I'm going to move into introducing the Canine Connection program. We're going to have a really brief video for you all, and then I'm going to turn it over to Pat to kind of describe the program. And then after learning about the program, I'm going to share some of the findings of my research on the Canine Connection program. And then ultimately at the end, I really want to leave enough time for us to kind of discuss how you can take some of this, all of this, any of this, and perhaps add some of your thoughts and this research to your own clients. So to begin with, who are these high-risk youth, and what is this human-animal interaction thing that I keep saying? So simply put, when we're talking about at-risk youth, such as those that we're going to be discussing today, these represent a really distinct group of kids who've been exposed to very specific environmental risks or adverse psychosocial stressors, and ultimately they really lack social support. So these risks and stressors may include poverty, coming from high crime neighborhoods, poor monitoring at home, exposure to abuse or violence, low placement of importance on education or poor education, or even educational dropout. We're also talking about exposure to crime or pro-criminal attitudes, substance use, and then even limited access to health care. So all of these risks, therefore, really place these kids at greater risk of poorer life outcomes, which include becoming victims and/or perpetrators of crime. So with regard to human-animal interaction, when we're talking about human-animal interaction, this is really a general term that I'm going to be using to emphasize this relational exchange that occurs between a human and an animal. And it's not as formal as many of you might understand the term to be animal-assisted therapy. This is a more formal term, but rather with human-animal interaction, it's much less formal and rather simply focuses on the relational exchange that occurs between a human and an animal. So before we can talk about human-animal interaction and the Canine Connection program, we really need to understand relationships and how we as humans really learn through attachment, such as the attachment we see here with this young man. So here we kind of see a very watered down version of attachment theory that in essence proposes that a child, in response to their caregiver's availability, consistency, and responsivity to their needs, really kind of develops both a way of viewing the world as well as a way of viewing themselves. So when that caregiver is inconsistent or unavailable to kind of respond to that child's needs, this really insecure attachment or insecure framework for viewing future relationships can emerge. So these early internal working models, therefore, really influence the processing of socially relevant information and can negatively influence how they both cope emotionally and interact interpersonally as they grow up. So spending an inordinate amount of time about being concerned about their own safety or mistrusting their environments that surround them, these are the children that can grow up really lacking the development of that self-reflective capacity. So that's that capacity to think and reflect on their own feelings, but also to think and reflect on the feelings of others outside of themselves. So this can then become that deficient empathy and poor emotional regulation that we often see with the kids, that we see in many of these at-risk youth who are at risk for these very poor life outcomes. So while security of attachment has been found to be an indicator of good social and emotional development, insecure attachment promotes mistrust, poor social ability, and behavioral problems, as many of us probably know in this room as clinicians. And research has found that it's been linked to overly hostile cognitive attributions in our conduct disordered youth. So to understand this, I want you to consider this kind of reciprocal causal relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, where this very pathological dysfunction, or for those of us at DMH, medical necessity, results from these distorted thinking or cognitive appraisals of events, which in turn negatively affect how we both feel and behave. So for an insecurely attached youth, their perceptions of the world can be negative or overly hostile, as they've really kind of developed distorted views of themselves and others based on those attachment models. Now, although relatively stable across the lifespan, I think it's really important to understand that attachment style is not fixed. There's hope, and that's where all of us work. We work in that space of hope. So, in fact, exposure to factors or relationships which challenge those maladaptive internal representations can act as corrective experiences and thereby potentially alter the resulting maladaptive functioning. So, what does all this have to do with animals? Well, I am proposing to you that animals could in fact be attachment figures, and that the interaction or bond that is established quickly between an animal and a child can then potentially offer opportunities for real therapeutic intervention via the connection that's made and the relationship that results. So as many of you know, this idea of the corrective emotional experience is not new, and it's actually a very purposeful technique that many of us use in our therapy sessions. And it's a technique between a therapist and a client that seeks to really re-expose them to an emotional situation or relationship that was perhaps not well received or even traumatic, allowing them to re-experience it and re-experience it differently with you. And in doing so, it really seeks to challenge and perhaps even replace those previous negative internal working models which hinder their functioning. So applied here, I am proposing that the interaction and relationship that's established with an animal can become that corrective emotional experience, providing these kids with an opportunity to re-experience an attachment relationship differently, without judgment, without fear, without shame, and ultimately challenge those relational models, resulting in measurably different thoughts and feelings about relationships with other humans. So take, for example, this picture. We see this little girl engaging in some imaginative play with her dog, perhaps reenacting something that was maybe a little bit scary, going to the doctor, but having an opportunity to experience it differently without that fear with her dog. So really, this idea that our interactions with animals can teach us much about what it is to interact with other humans. And it's not new. But I'd like you to keep all of this in mind as you learn about the Canine Connection program and the dogs and the kids that they help.
Ph.D. and I met as we were volunteering in a humane education program.
And went to grooming school and training schools and ended up meeting cats and started canine connection.
The program brought a few shelter dogs in to be trained by a number of middle school students. And we were really inspired by the bond that we saw develop so quickly between the dogs and the students. And we decided that we could develop a program that would really take advantage of that bond.
The program is designed to bring kids in challenging situations together with homeless pets.
I actually was going through rough times, and this program being here at the Teen Center was actually a pretty positive effect on me.
I have a pretty extensive criminal record, anything from drug dealing, robberies, assault.
My sister was in K9 a few years ago, and so as soon as I heard that it was coming to Olympic, I was the first one I was like, sign me up.
And it's just fun to work with things that are alive, not boring papers and like computers and stuff like that.
We interview the students who are interested in being in the program and consult with the student counselors and principals. One of the things we love to do is sometimes overrule staff who say don't take this student because he or she has such a high absentee rate, because we find that absentee rate diminishes or completely disappears once they start coming to school to see their dogs.
I feel a lot better after I get to play with my dog and make my dog stay better.
If they come into the Canine Connection program, that dog will no longer be at risk of being euthanized. Every single dog that's in the program has gotten a permanent home.
Being able to relate to this dog who comes out of a shelter, not knowing its parents or not having a friend and being covered in four walls of concrete.
He relates a lot to me. he's like really anxious, which is like I'm anxious sometimes, or like really energetic. I have a lot of energy all the time, you know, and like he has trouble paying attention just like me.
I was pretty shy. They paired me up with Essie, and at first she was really shy.
When she sits really tucked, kind of like, I'm not sure. You notice her mouth is kind of red and she's panting. When they get nervous, they do that. It's not only when they're hot.
Most of the time I'm wearing black. I'm just like, about life, I guess. And whenever I come in here to see the dogs, I always have a smile on my face.
I'm not really much of a people person, so I came here, and it's like I've noticed I'm starting to open up, becoming friends, making friends.
The program lasts for 2 hours a day. The first hour of the day is spent in training the dogs.
Right, guys? Now right between her front paws. Come here. All right, everybody can see that? So we have our dogs in a six. She's going to have food in her hand. Good girl.
I actually just got out of juvie for the second time.
I always sulked for like the first week, just this dog, you know, because he had a little dog. And you see him now walking through that saying and glowing, you know, and then he wants to do animal care and being so proud of, like, he's taught me to dance and roll over. We work with the students on developing their dreams and their goals.
I want to be a writer, being a photographer.
Just to, you know, to be able to work with animals.
I want to be an audio engineer.
5 things that you can do to get you closer towards your goal.
It was a tight circle where we would express ourselves and just be able to hang around with the dogs in a form of like therapy.
I thought it was going to be more learning how to train dogs. I didn't know it would be so educational.
It's more than just a class to me now. They had us fill out this goal sheet. I actually developed like a plan.
We offer our services free of charge to mentor other startups, which we've done around the world and in the United States. And the great thing about this kind of program is that dogs provide the magic.
I definitely want to volunteer here at the shelter after this.
I'm hoping to get a job like working with dogs.
Get more involved in other programs too, and you know, just keep me distracted from my regular lifestyle. I see myself probably changing after this.
At the end of the 3-week program, we have the students give a presentation and do a little dog show and show what they've learned during this time.
So today's graduation. How do you guys feel?
I feel like Joey's gonna steal the show, and I feel bad for the rest of the dogs.
Why?
Because he knows our tricks.
A lot of these kids, they've been called out, but it's being shaming, discipline. So they're called out on that field, but they're called out in honor.
What can I say about Marco? He has a whole lot of energy and a lot of love to give. He loves to cuddle and is the reason why I wake up in the mornings happy to get to school.
The first 2 weeks I was paired up with Essence, a gray and white pit bull. I saw aspects of myself in Essie. At first she was shy and timid, but as the program went on she became lively and outgoing. Essie was adopted 2 weeks after training, and I feel amazing knowing that I helped a good dog find a home.
I met him a few weeks ago at the beginning of K9, and we've become inseparable. Scotch is my best bud now, and I would definitely adopt him if I could.
I have to say I greatly underestimated what I was going to take from the program. Now I'm planning to start a career in the animal care field. At first, I was not too happy with my dog. I can't stress how many times I said I wanted a big dog. But as the days passed, he really grew on me. He's very obedient. He learned much faster than most of the dogs and learned a few extra tricks. I realize he's not a small dog. He's the biggest dog of them.
In between programs, once a month, we go back to each of the schools and we, celebrate their successes. We find out how they're doing with their goals, bring some dogs, and generally just maintain that bond. This is just the introduction. They're with us for life now.
So now this program's over, how do you feel?
Like a celebrity.
The picture is of Clyde's first dog that got adopted.
K9 is a fabulous experience that everybody should have.
it was a blessing for the dogs and also for us.
It's joyful to be able to come here and be in the program and watch the progress.
I tend to think of Canine Connection as a little pebble that's thrown into a pond, and these ripples go out, and my hope is that in the years to come, more and more and more of this type of program will be established.
So I think you've learned a lot about what we do at Canine Connection, and I wanted to tell you about one of our students in this program, Ernesto, who I imagine you'll remember, who sort of wanted a big dog, got his little dog, felt like a celebrity at the end. When we started the program, he was under house arrest. And as he said at the beginning of the video, he had a number of, he'd been involved in a number of activities that had gotten him into trouble. After the program ended, and you could see the change that he went through during that program, I mean, it was really amazing for us to see. They decided to put him back into juvenile hall. And we wrote a letter to the court, and talking about his experience at Canine, and and how he had changed, and they weren't even allowed to introduce that in court. He ended up back in juvenile hall, and then for like at least 6 months transferred from one juvenile hall to another, and then ended up in camp, and he was incarcerated for a year. And we stayed in touch with his mom during that time and wrote letters to him, and he got back to us, and he did absolutely amazing during that time. He had made a decision that he wasn't going to get into trouble, and as you can see, he's a big guy. He was always having, especially in juvie, he was having kids wanting to fight with him and everything, and he stayed out of trouble. He graduated from high school while he was in camp. He was able to get a paying job in camp because he was doing so well, and he was released in June, and he is now interning for us, which we're really delighted with, and I'm really glad to bring him back into the canine fold, because as you know, like when he did really well in an atmosphere where he had boundaries and he was told what to do, so. It's nice to be able to bring him back into the fold. He goes to the shelter every day and helps with picking up the dogs, bringing them to class, participating in class, helping out. And, it's interesting, they say about dogs, you can't save one dog, but you can't save all the dogs, you can save one. And it's sort of like, with the kids, you feel so good if you can have one student that has gone through this, huge arc. We stay in touch with all of our students. As we said in the video, we go back and check in with them once a month. We're continuing to evolve in terms of our own programming. Last January, we did a program at the lockdown unit at Vista Del Mar. And it was the first time that they'd had anyone come in to do a program with these students. And we were thinking about it, thought, well, what should we do? We thought, let's make it a 2-week program instead of a 3-week program, just to because we weren't sure how that was going to go, and we decided to have all owned dogs, all staff dogs, rather than shelter dogs, because we knew that these kids had had so much loss in their lives that they were not going, we didn't want to have the possibility that a dog would be adopted during the program that they were in and then have a replacement dog. So, and we decided to just have 6 staff there and 6 kids. And it was just an experiment. It was the best program we had ever done. I mean, it was absolutely amazing, the bonds that everyone formed. We were having more, we had 8 kids in 3-week programs, which was very successful, but we have volunteers kind of coming and going, because it's very difficult to ask a volunteer to come to a program 5 days a week for 3 weeks for 2 hours a day. I mean, it takes half your day. So when we were able to have this program for 2 weeks and every single one of us went every single day, it was really, really different. So we're doing an experiment this year, and we're experimenting with 2-week programs and 6 students. We use the shelter dogs, of course, but it's 6 students, 6 dogs, 6 staff. We have 1 full-time paid staff person that's there, and everyone else is a volunteer. We're in the middle of a program right now, and we were so excited to find that Jess was, she had just finished all her class and all her requirements for her doctorate, and she was just waiting to start a new job. And so I said, would you volunteer during this program? So she's there every day and participating as one of the 6 staff people. And it'll be really interesting to discuss after the program what she sees and what she thinks the impact is of having it 2 weeks rather than 3 weeks. We feel like it's really been great, but we want to sort of rely on her expertise. I'm going to let her come back now and give the results of her study, and then we can take questions at the end. I also I brought this along. Catherine and I last year completed this startup manual for sort of everything that you wanted to ask about how do you actually start a program like this. And we're involved in mentoring people wherever. We started a program in South Africa a couple of years ago or helped them start, mentored them to start a program. There's various people around the country that get in touch with us and say, how do you start up a program? So we can send them this manual, and then we're available free of charge to Skype with them or talk on the phone or email and just help them get started, because that's what we really want to leave as our legacy, is to getting new programs, they're not canine connection programs. They can be however the people in their own community want to do them. So if anyone is interested too, or knows anybody that wants to, just know that this is available. Okay, Jess.
All right, so now we get to talk about research. So I did a study on the Canine Connection Program in 2012. I studied 5 class cycles. So as we mentioned in the video, the Canine Connection Program goes to various continuation high schools around LA County. And so I studied 5 of those classes during that year, and ended up being a total of 35 students at the end that did both the pre and post assessment. The kids were between the ages of 13 to 18 years old, and I gathered quite a bit of information using some empirically validated questionnaires. And I assessed, in particular, I was interested in their overall emotional intelligence, empathy, and antisocial cognitive distortions, both before and after having completed the program. So before I jump into the research, when I'm talking about emotional intelligence, it's really a hot topic, especially lately, particularly in the educational arena. Because when we're talking about emotional intelligence, or EQ, it's really unlike IQ, because IQ is pretty static, but EQ, which is very exciting, is not. It can fluctuate, And it's rather dynamic and can fluctuate if it's fostered. So EQ, or emotional intelligence, is really made up of several kind of social and emotional competencies and skills that really determine how well we understand and express ourselves, how well we understand and relate to others, and how well we cope with kind of daily stressors and demands. So emotional intelligence really in general is hugely important to both our interpersonal success and our intrapersonal success. So when we're talking about emotional intelligence with regard to the data that I collected, what I found was that there was a significant increase in their measured emotional intelligence after having completed the program. So in descriptive terms, what this meant was that they were able to move from low average emotional intelligence all the way up to high emotional intelligence. And in layman's terms, really what this means is that after completing the 3-week program, these kids were significantly more able to recognize and express their emotions, understand and relate to others, and cope better with daily stressors. Another thing I measured was empathy. So when we're talking about empathy, what we're speaking about is really this kind of dynamic interpersonal ability that represents a very small sub-facet within the larger overall emotional intelligence. And it involves both affective and cognitive components, where empathy really allows us to kind of perceive and understand the emotions of others outside of ourselves. So with regard to empathy, what I found was that there was also a significant increase, demonstrating that after completing the program, these kids had significantly increased their ability to be aware of, understand, and appreciate the feelings of others. Again, only in 3 weeks. So finally, when we talk about antisocial cognitive distortions, we're really talking about a very specific type of thinking error. So antisocial cognitive distortions are very self-serving in nature, in so much that they really seek to protect an individual from blame or negative self-concept by using rationalizations to kind of cognitively neutralize empathy or guilt that they might feel about engaging in specific problem behaviors. So for example, stealing. Someone might have the thought, anyone that leaves the keys in the car is just asking to have their car stolen. So that would be something to kind of cognitively neutralize that guilt that they might have about a stealing behavior. So with regard to antisocial cognitive distortions, I found that participation in the program significantly reduced these rationalizations. And in descriptive terms, these kids were able to move from the borderline clinical range all the way down to non-clinical, and so non-clinical they were actually off the chart. In layman's terms, what this means is that after completing the program, these kids endure significantly fewer of these antisocial cognitive distortions. So in essence, they really didn't have to rely on those rationalizations or defense mechanisms anymore. So to recap, what all this means was that there was a significant increase in overall emotional intelligence, a significant increase in empathy, and a significant decrease in antisocial cognitive distortions. And all of these results, we can see that participation in a human-animal interaction program like the Canine Connection program can obviously have very highly and measurably positive effects on the emotional development and functioning of at-risk kids. And I would propose that really human-animal interaction appears to act as kind of this emotional learning tool, allowing these kids to really develop their capacity to understand themselves and others emotionally through that relationship with the dog, and integrate that information into their exchanges with people based on those more adaptive cognitive appraisals. So the result of the human-animal interaction may then be an opportunity to engage in a relationship which challenges those previous internal working models and fosters both emotional and empathic growth. So through all of this, I hope that you're all able to kind of begin to see animals as potential furry agents for change, particularly with at-risk youth. And before we open it up to kind of discuss all of this, because there's always a lot of discussion and questions and excitement, I want to offer some potential ideas for you to be able to kind of integrate some of this information into your own work with clients and kind of harness that canine connection. So one thing you could do, you could refer to a canine connection type program. As Pat mentioned, they have startups. There's various programs that they're mentoring around not only around the county, around the country, but around the world. So if there's not one close to you, maybe you could start one up yourself. There's also other programs, for example, up in the Valley area, mid-California area in Santa Rosa, there's a program called the Forget-Me-Not Farm. It's a therapeutic farm that's run by the Humane Society up there. And it's based on the idea of green therapy, and it takes abandoned and abused farm animals, so pigs, cows, chickens, and it's been running since the mid-90s, and it is partnered with the local local courts in the area, and social workers are able to bring kids that are in the system to the program, and they're able to kind of engage in structured activities and become a part of a series of real healthy and nurturing relationships where kind of plants and animals are cared for and adults can start to be trusted again. There's another, you can integrate human-animal interaction into your own work. Formally, by becoming a certified animal-assisted therapy team, or contacting an animal-assisted therapy program and having them come to your clinic or to your program. Also, thinking about using the human-animal interaction as an emotional learning tool, it's important to be aware of the benefits of human-animal interaction, and there's vast benefits that have panned out in the research, and it's across fields. So in the medical research, in the judicial research, in the psychological research, and so if you're interested in any of that, it's way beyond the scope here, but if you have a niche and you're interested in that, believe me, I had to do an exhaustive literature review. So I've got all of the literature. If you're interested in it, I would be more than happy to pass it along to you because it's very exciting. Another thing to consider is even simply suggesting to a client that they volunteer at a shelter could be hugely impactful. Another thing that I would propose is pets are hugely important, particularly for the kids and the families that we work with. There was a study that was done maybe 9 years ago or so using life space drawings. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar. It's a projective type of drawing with adult survivors of childhood abuse. I believe it was childhood sexual abuse. And in essence, you draw the circle, and within the circle, they're instructed to draw all of the individuals in their life that are of importance. And then you discuss the closeness and all of that. So what they found in this qualitative study was that these adult survivors, if there was an animal, a pet in the home during the time that the abuse was happening, they were consistently drawing that pet in the life space drawing between them and the perpetrator. So the pet became a barrier. The pet became an opportunity to protect them from the perpetrator. So exploring that, harnessing that with your own clients. I would also encourage you to, during intakes, talk about loss and trauma of a pet. When we're talking about domestic violence survivors that are having to leave a home, we need to be aware that 70% of domestic violence also includes violence against a pet. And sometimes that prevents the individual from leaving the home. Also, if we're talking about children that have been removed from their homes, we're also potentially talking about them being removed from their pet, which is hugely traumatic, and that's a loss that needs to be explored. So also exploring these things within session. Also, just kind of a final thing, I would encourage you to use what's available to you. I frequently, in working with foster youth, will encourage them to invite the pets in the home into our sessions, because sometimes it's just easier for the pet to tell me what happened. And especially as they're just getting to know me. And so there are frequently been sessions where the dog is telling me what's happened, or perhaps they're more comfortable speaking to the puppet and the dog is telling the puppet what's happened. And that's a way to be able to build that trust. So just kind of getting creative, and again, if you're interested in any of the literature, because there's so much out there, I would be more than happy to pass that along to you. My contact information, Pat's contact information. We also have cards in the back and flyers as well. So with that, I would like to open it up for discussion, thoughts, questions, protests.
Yeah, I actually just want to give a historical perspective here. It was interesting when Pat was talking. She was talking about Vista Del Mar. That was my stomping area as a kid. And I don't know if you realize it, but Vista Del Mar originally in the 40s and 50s was an orphanage. Right. And they did adoptions, and a good friend of my family was the director of the program. And then when the foster home movement came, fostering, we've been talking about fostering as well, then it slowly became more of a mental health facility. But originally it was an adopt, and now you're talking about animal adoption at Vista Del Mar. So it's like kind of gone full circle. Yeah, amazing.
It really is. Well, and you know, when we think about the child welfare system, really we're talking about a system that came about because of the animal welfare system. Right. So we're talking about systems that have been connected for over 100 years now. So it makes sense.
I just have questions. The closest one of these programs is in West LA, or do you know if there's any in the Long Beach area?
I don't know of any in the Long Beach area. There's not a lot going on right now. So we're hoping that more people will start them. There was one that was started, and I'm not sure exactly what they're doing now, but they were working with Homeboy Industries, which was great. Like working with the kids there, the young men there. It's kind of a newly exploding field, I think. There's a rescue that works with pit bulls called Karma Rescue, and they just started a program at a maximum security prison in Lancaster, where they're working with men who are serving life terms who are not allowed to even touch another person, who may not have seen a dog for 8 or 10 years, and it apparently has changed the whole sort of feeling at the prison. Some of the quotes that we've seen from these men who have worked with these dogs, which is, will bring you to tears. It's really incredible. One of the things that you find when you work with dogs and people is that you see change occur in such a short time. I've worked in with various populations, and I like to see the change happen, and that's why starting Canine was really wonderful. One of the very, very first programs that we had back in 2005. I don't know, I was just thinking of it when Jess was talking. We had this young woman who she was about 13 or 14 years old, very overweight, very withdrawn, did not interact with any of her peers. And she came in, she really, she didn't want to do very much with anybody or even the dogs. And we brought this dog that was this really old pit bull with ears that had it had obviously been used, to fight. And her name was Maggie. And she had, her ears were all chewed off, and she was just, she didn't want to really do anything either. This girl saw this dog, their eyes met, and, they were just together for the whole time, and she would just sit there and pet Maggie. At the end, when we did graduation, we called it the Maggie show. All the dogs would come out and do their tricks, and then we brought out a dog bed, Maggie came out and lay down on the dog bed like this, and and her trainer sort of petted her. But this girl at the graduation, her whole family came and they brought food and her face was just lit up, and it was just amazing to see the transformation in this girl. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the value of Jess's study, because there haven't been any quantitative studies on this. When you meet Maggie and this girl, you can see the change. But to actually have numbers, for funders love numbers. So this is really, really great to be able, to get more grants and to get more funding for these type of programs.
So I think, though, something that you could explore in the Long Beach area is a Humane education program. I know
SPCL.
Yeah,
SPCA,
I know. I think a few months ago you guys had a speaker from SPCA LA in here, right? And she mentioned something about the Humane education programs. They're all run through ASPCLA, and I think
SPCA.
Yeah, and I think they're even perhaps a mandate in California for it to be a part of the curriculum, but I'm not sure that all the schools.
Yeah, definitely get in touch.
But they go into the classrooms and provide. It's not the same, but if you're really excited about the K-9 Connection program, perhaps there needs to be one started out in Long Beach.
I think they probably have a humane education person there that also might be able to do referrals, to other things in the area.
It's called the Animal Safety Net Program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was listening to you in regards to the dogs bringing people together. At our shelter, we have 2 cats. We adopted 2 cats, Fluffy and Ruby. And let me tell you the difference in the women that we've seen. They come in here, come in our shelter being all sad, and as soon as they see these 2 cats, they're like glowing, like, oh my God, they start petting them. Even when we're doing groups with them, the cats come in the room with them, they sit with them. So animals do make a difference in a person's life.
Absolutely. There was recently, maybe about 9 months ago or so, there was an art installment that was done, and it was actually championed by a local social worker who would work down in Skid Row, and it was called My Dog Is My Home, and it was all just pictures of individuals who were living on the streets with their dog or their cat or their bunny or and the premise was, this is my home. And I think something that's unfortunate in LA County is that there's not a lot of shelters that allow individuals to come in with their pets. And so a lot of people would rather stay on the street as long as they have their pet, or even stay in an abusive home as long as they don't have to lose their pet, or leave their pet.
I'm sure this is in the startup guide that you did, which is so admirable that you're sharing this information and you've documented it. But I'm interested to tease out how much of the impact on the kids do you attribute to the curriculum, the structure, or what the staff bring to helping them interpret the relationship and the information and the experience versus just the pure time with the animal?
That's an interesting question. And I think, the great thing about it is that I would say, like in the 90% is the animals, or maybe if not that. And that's why we're always looking for ways to bring other things in. We work with the kids we do work with them on their own personal goals, because we're working now with all high school students, and these are young people in continuation schools, and they really kind of need to figure out what they're going to be doing when they graduate, and when they're going to graduate, and what they need to graduate. But that's why I just sort of call it magic. You put the kids and the dogs together, and no matter what you do, you are going to have a positive outcome. So it's just a question of trying to make it better and better and better.
And that's what I think is pretty amazing. When I was studying the program, at 5 different class cycles at 5 different locations, 5 different sets of kids, the curriculum was never the same. And I think that's something that's interesting. The one thing that was always the same was that the kids always had an interaction with the dogs, and the kids always had an interaction with the dogs 2 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks. That was the constant. The staff was perhaps a little different. There may have been some of the similar staff, but the curriculum would change from. There's certain, you guys have it's almost kind of like a standard. Oh, we've got these 15, and we kind of pull from these and this, then we do this, and based on the needs of the kids. So that varies a little bit. So it's kind of like you can't really go wrong as long as you have that human-animal interaction component to it.
I really do like having a small number of staff and having them there every single day, because I do think that the dogs facilitate the bond between the adults and the students. And one of the things that we try, that we want the students to sort of just get is that there are adults in the community that care about them and that will be there for them. And if we walked in there without dogs, with a bunch of high school students in continuation schools, they go, yeah, hi. But they're automatically, we have this status conferred on us of being okay because we brought the dogs. So that enables those relationships to develop much more quickly. And it's always exciting to us when we find kids. I mean, we still have kids from, from the early of 2005, in their 20s now, will come back and say, oh, Canine Connection, that meant so much to me. So, and for a small program, it really, I really think that it does have a huge impact. They'll save the pictures that we give them of themselves and their dogs and their little certificate of graduation. And they also develop a bond with one another, which again, for that age group, sometimes they can be so cruel to one another. And you get these kids together and they may or may not know one another, and some of them may be really outgoing and some of them may be shy, but they've got each other's back by the end of that, or the middle of that program.
I think it's also really, I just think it's also really interesting too. The dogs allow opportunities for conversations to happen more quickly that would take months in therapy to bring up. I mean, we were, it was just day 2, this class that we're doing right now, where we were able to, it was day 1, no, it was day 2 when they first saw the dogs, and there was a young man who was paired with a all-black lab, and his perception of the dog was that it was going to be a big, really mean dog, because every other black dog he had ever met was a really mean dog. But this was a very mild-mannered, kind dog, and he really bonded with him after just that first day. And so we were able to kind of open up this conversation about, gosh, what's it like when, people perceive you to be one way, and you're really very different, And so, that can go on for, that's like the stuff that us as clinicians live for. Like, yeah, let's get into that insight work, and that was day 2.
Yeah, day 2.
So
and one of the things that we always do is we insist on sitting in a circle in a classroom. We do dog training first, and then we go into a classroom, and we'll run in and move all the tables out of the room, like nothing in between, but just, the circle of class with the staff and the students and peer leaders that we have, kids who have graduated from the program before who come back, and to help. And there's just something about, which I know you all know, there's something about that circle of, just that we're all there together. There's, it's very democratic, it's very unhierarchical, and it's something that we always try to train our staff and our volunteers to know that this isn't, don't be afraid of silence, and, don't be telling the students what you think they ought to do. It's so interesting to have the problems that come up, that they'll talk about obstacles that they face, or, challenges in meeting their goals, and to find out from the other students, what do they suggest? What are they, we learn all the time from these kids.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's your assessment process as you kind of bring students in. Is there anybody that you don't accept? And what issues might those be? Obviously, some students, especially those who have been abused, sometimes they have abused animals themselves. Is that a concern?
Oh, when we're taking students into the program, no, there's nobody that we wouldn't accept. The only kids that we wouldn't accept would be ones that we interview them. We can't take every student that applies, but. Sometimes there's a student that the staff, the principal or something, will say this student, cannot be in the program for whatever reason, and we have to go along. We have to go along with that. But we have never had a problem with any student. I mean, it's 10 years. We've never had a problem with any student that we've that's been in the
something interesting too. This time for me, right now, being a part of the program is very different, obviously, than when I was the researcher, kind of for the outsider looking in. Now I'm like very much in the milieu and in the process, and so in doing the interviews, for this current class that's going on right now, there was a young man who was sharing about. One of his own dogs is a protection dog, and is one of his parents was teaching it and grooming it to be an attack dog, and it was like, oh gosh, I think this person would be a really great candidate because they can learn that dogs don't have to be that way. They can be loving and caring, and so sometimes it's kind of the opposite of what you would expect, because I think some people would be like, oh well, this guy's out because he's definitely going to treat this dog inappropriately.
That's like Ernesto, and the guy, because when he was interviewed in the program, he was like, yeah, my grandmother has 2 pit bulls, and they attacked this old lady, and they really messed her up and everything, and I had, and as he said, I cannot stress enough how much I wanted to, told them I wanted a big dog, and we were kind of like, there's no way he's having a pit bull. He's getting the Boston Terrier. But he learned from that. I mean, he has he has a completely different outlook on on dogs, and I mean, he would have been let's have the pit bulls fight.
And it's funny, he's an intern currently for the program, and he was there yesterday, and he was unloading the van, and he got out this very little dog. It was like me. And he has this little long leash and a little dog, and he was cool, just walking it. And it was just very different.
Size of a
he's like this big.
Kyle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are the dogs prepared for your program? How are the dogs prepared for your program?
Prepared?
Yeah. How does that work?
These dogs are from NKLA, No Kill LA. We've always worked with the local shelter, with West LA Shelter, and we don't have a kennel. So we had sort of gotten ourselves into situations a couple of times where we'd have a dog that we were having a really difficult time getting adopted for one reason or another, and they ended up slightly starting to go crazy in the shelter, and the shelter would say, this dog's going to be put down. So we would never let that happen. So we were ending up like boarding dogs and trying to, it got to be really expensive. And after a couple of experiences like that, we thought, okay, for a while, let's do NKLA, because we know that there's no possibility that any of those dogs, that we'd have to take because they were going to be put down. But there are dogs that are pulled from the shelter, and they all need homes just as much. But we have our dog trainer who is very well qualified to temperament test the dogs. So there's certain criteria that we use, and they have to be food motivated. They have to be safe around other dogs, that not be aggressive, be able to they do all the touching, and they do that to make sure that they don't have any terrible sensitivities.
They can't do with the
or be food aggressive, and they have to be interested in people. They have to want it. They have to want it, because if you're working with if you bring in a dog that's like just not doesn't want to work for food, because we do train them with treats, or just isn't interested in people, that wouldn't really work for this program.
I just had kind of additional, we're just
they apply to come in. You don't get referrals. And
no, they have to be at the school that we are.
Okay, and you go to the school, so that makes it very easy for them to get to the program.
Yes.
So I assume your attrition rate is negligible, if you have any, which is another great way to promote your program for funders, because that hardly ever happens.
In fact, the only attrition rate I had for my study was that I was really trying to get a control group, which was going to be the waitlist control. So if there was maybe 10 kids that wanted to get in, but they always only do 8 kids at a time, so those 2 kids would still do the pre-post test, but they'd be on the wait list. They'd come, they'd do the pre-test, but as soon as they figured out they were not in the program, they're like, I'm not coming back. I don't care how many Cheetos you have. So that was that was sad, but from the program.
The kids really stay, and we get them, we also really try to reinforce that they have to keep up with their studies. They have to, that's why having the classroom portion of it and the discussions and everything are really valuable, because we had one program that we did it. We go back to the same schools all the time. Right now we're going back, we have 5 schools, and we go to each of them twice during the school year. But we had one community day school that's no longer in existence, but it was in Santa Monica, and they had a very few numbers, like 25 students or something. And the only kids that came to school were the ones that were in the canine program. Nobody else came. So once we weren't there, they folded up their tent.
Any other questions? I really want to thank you both. You can see why I said I came from the front. I'm like, well, let's start